And we are back. Welcome back, Irish Breakdown Nation, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Y'all remember that dude? That's Brian Smith. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are here to talk about Notre Dame picking up Christopher Terek, a 2023 offensive lineman from Glen Ellen, Illinois, Glenbard West. If that sounds familiar, it's close to a 2024 commit, Cam Williams, who's from Glenbard East. Or no, is he from Glenbard South? Cam Williams is from Glenbard South. So obviously a very, very close area. So Notre Dame picks up an offensive lineman from Christopher Terek, and not just picked them up, Brian, but they flipped them from Wisconsin. And I think you and I would both agree that when you can go beat Wisconsin for kids, you're landing a physical kid and a kid with some potential and some upside.
I love getting at least one good offensive or defensive lineman from Chicago. It's just a traditional thing because I grew up in the Lou Holtz era anyway. But when I watched his film, and I know we're going to talk more specifics about it in a moment, his junior to senior film, I mean, he was a good player as a junior, but the difference is striking to me to see him as a senior. I just watched it again a few minutes ago. So, yes, it is indeed a good pickup.
Brian, this is an interesting backstory. So let's kind of talk about how this one went down. Then we'll get into, what the class impact is for Notre Dame. We'll watch some film, and then we'll talk about what's next in this class. So Christopher Terek obviously is a name that wasn't on the radar for a while. And you watch his junior film, Brian, and you're like, yeah, he's a nice kid. He's a project type of kid that can go to Wisconsin, sit for 2-3 years, and eventually have a chance to step in and be a guard there and maybe be an all Big Ten caliber kid. Comes out as a senior, a little longer, a little thicker, and he was moving better. And his senior film, for me, really popped, which we'll get into here in a little bit. And then as Notre Dame started kind of looking around at the 2023 class, they were in a situation, Brian, where when you look at, and we'll kind of talk about this, the class impact, 5 offensive linemen wasn't a need. It was more of a want if the right guy came along. I reached out to some sources in the last couple of weeks as Christopher Terek was kind of in decision-making mode and said, hey, if you guys, if Notre Dame doesn't get this kid, where do they turn? And the answer I kind of got back was they're nowhere. They'll focus on 2024. They don't need another offensive lineman. Harry Heastan and the staff liked Christopher Terek. They wanted Christopher Terek. It was either him or nobody else on the offensive line. And so they got on him later. They brought him in for a visit in middle of October so that fans kind of will understand that recruits don't I say this all the time, Brian. Every time Notre Dame loses a game, I literally had people asking me this last night. Does the loss to USC, how's it going to affect us with recruits? Are we going to lose any recruits because of it? I'm like, no, they're not. Recruits don't react that emotionally. Christopher Terek visited for Notre Dame's game against Stanford. Okay, so Michael Floyd visited. Manti Te'o visited for the 2008 game against Syracuse. Michael Floyd visited Notre Dame and committed to Notre Dame in 2007 as part of one of the best recruiting classes Notre Dame has had, or I would argue the best recruiting class Notre Dame has had since in the post-Lou Holtz era. Kids don't react as emotionally to that stuff. He saw what Notre Dame was doing with the offensive line, and they made a push. Now, here's the interesting thing, Brian. We get this a lot. This next part of the story, we get a lot with Notre Dame kids. And it usually tells me this is why this kid is a Notre Dame kid. And it with Tarrick, it was he knew for a while he wanted, from what I'm told, he wanted to go to Notre Dame. That's where he kind of knew was the best place for him. But he's very torn on flipping and decommitting. And because Wisconsin got him early, we remember that with Drew Tranquill. I remember that with Nick Martin having a tough time, stepping away from Kentucky. We see that with a lot of kids. And sometimes they end up not flipping. Remember Jordan Westerkamp, the receiver from Nebraska, ended up not flipping to Notre Dame, but a lot of them do, and obviously Christopher Terek did. So that's really what it came down to, was that decision. He was really torn about it. He had actually kind of told the staff that he was going to take a step back, finish the playoffs for his high school team. He wanted to focus on his team. They lost, I think in round 2 of the playoffs, and then this last week he's really been in decision-making mode and gave the staff the word today. So that's kind of a little bit of the backstory on how this whole thing went down, Brian.
I think that shows that he's got some character. First off, Notre Dame beats to a different drum than especially where I have been living in the state of Florida, in terms of how programs have done their business over the decades. So he will probably fit in. He looks at big picture. What do you have to do to fit in Notre Dame's curriculum as well as their social structure? Kids that aren't just going to make fly off the handle decisions. So I didn't know that he was struggling with it that much. I wasn't sure if Notre Dame was pushing for him, but obviously they were. So to me, that's a good sign. And, I respect Wisconsin's program, especially for O-line. It's been tremendous for, 25 years?
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem with somebody, hey, I want to be a part of that. I don't have any problem. They were, quite honestly, over that same time, they've been better at O-line than Notre Dame has. Notre Dame's been more up and down. So I get it. But if he came to that conclusion and he went through the process in a long fashion, it was probably the best way for him to do it, and good for Notre Dame for getting it.
Let's talk about the class impact of this, Brian. Obviously, this is the 25th player to commit to Notre Dame in the 2023 class. They're not done yet. They've got at least 2 more spots that they'd like to fill. This gives them 13 offensive players. I still remember kind of early in the summer, Notre Dame fans talking about, is the offensive class going to pick up and catch up to the defensive class? Well, they have now passed them in numbers. They now have 13 offensive commits, and he is the 5th offensive lineman to commit. Technically, he's the 6th offensive lineman to commit, but Elijah Page decommitted and flipped to USC earlier in the year. So this gives them 5 offensive linemen. When you looked at the last couple years, Brian, Notre Dame came up short numbers in 2020. And that was the class with Tosh Baker and Michael Carmody. The 2019 class is down to 2 kids. It's Andrew Kristofic and Zeke Correll. So you landed 2 players in 2019 that are still left on the roster, 2 players from the 2020 class, and then you had 5-man class in 2021 and a 5-man class last year. So that kind of put Notre Dame into you only really need 4, and in a worst-case scenario, they could get away with 3 because of the youth on the current roster. When Joey Tanona's career was ended by injury, he got in a car accident and it just made it to where he couldn't come back and play football anymore. It opened up a spot for another lineman, and that's kind of when you saw Notre Dame look around to guys like Elijah Page, and they could even potentially go to 6 if it was the right group, although 5 was kind of the number. But the 5 was sort of what they wanted. It wasn't the need. They weren't going to take a 5th offensive lineman just to take a guy. I think people need to understand that this was not gee, you lost Elijah Page, so you got to go find somebody, move. They were perfectly fine being at 4 because 4 was the need. 5 gives you that buffer, Brian. And I think when it comes to offensive linemen, I think being able to kind of have that where if you find the right kid is important. I think that's important, Brian. I want you to comment on that. But the second part of it, too, is I think for the second year in a row, Notre Dame has landed a starting 5. And I think that's an important one, too. Now, of course, Joey Tanona ended up not being able to pan out, but they landed pure tackles last year. But they landed guards in the center. And this year, even more so, I think one thing that impacted the ability to take Christopher Terek was the senior seasons from Sullivan Absher and Charles Jagasol, because they looked more like future tackles. Whereas before, it's kind of like, right tackle guard, especially Jagasol looking like he could even play left tackle now. That gave them the ability to take a kid like Tarrick and not have to look for a pure tackle, which was kind of the earlier need for the 5th guy. I think those 2 things obviously were very interesting aspects of Notre Dame being able to find this kid, identify this kid, and push for this kid, and, of course, get another kid from the state of Illinois.
Your point about getting 5 is something that I talk about all the time with recruiting, and I'll argue with fans. You'll see a school get excited. They have a position where they're struggling. Pick whatever school, whatever position, and they'll over-recruit it a year, which is fine. But do you have a balanced class, at least over two classes? Look at Texas A&M. You cannot recruit defensive line any better than they have over the last 4 years. It's not possible. But they didn't have other parts around it that worked together, and they had a lot of individuals instead of team guys, kind of like what we were talking about with Tarrick coming for the right reasons. Those things destroy you. This kid adds into a group that you can put together that from left tackle to right tackle can balance itself out. And like you said, they wanted, if they were going to take a kid, they weren't going to waste a scholarship. They're down to kind of the numbers. If they're going to take anybody else, it's got to be a really good player. Mm-hmm. I can't see why they wouldn't have done this. So fit at Notre Dame's a little different again, But just from my football perspective, it makes sense. My only question for you, Brian, out of the kids they've taken last year and this year, which one is the most likely to end up playing center? Because that's,
Right.
except for left tackle, I mean, it's probably the hardest spot to play on the
Joe
O line.
Otting is the kid they're targeting for that now, but Sam Pendleton has also been talked about possibly doing that. I think it's, in a 2-year span, you've got, because Tanona was a kid that they had potentially looked at that along with Ashton Craig last year. I think now Ashton Craig is kind of the fit there. You have Pat Coogan playing that position from the 2021 class. My understanding is Joe Otting will probably get first crack at that, but then you'll also potentially see Sam Pendleton get some chances to do that too, if that's going to get him on the field faster. And I've compared Sam Pendleton a lot to a kid that he reminds me a ton of is Braxton Cave. So I think, weight room kid, 6'3", 6'4", real physical, broad shoulders, little more stocky than he is long, really fits inside. Reminds me a lot of Braxton Cave coming out of high school. Maybe he moves a tad better than Braxton did. Braxton was a good football player at Notre Dame, especially before the foot injury. And was it 2010 when he hurt his foot, or 2011? Yeah. That kind of hampered him a little bit, but still a good football player at Notre Dame. No question about it.
Yeah, I hope that Notre Dame can keep this balance up. And it's ironic that this kid committed today, because you and I talk to some of the same people around the industry. You're not going to beat USC or any team unless you can run the ball consistently, et cetera, et cetera. Last night, obviously, number 7 being banged up, and he's a freight train, but he had turf toe.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't get you don't get to use your best player. That hurts. Quarterback situation's a little iffy, although you got to give Drew Pine credit. He was accurate last night. I mean, there ain't any way around. Yeah. He was accurate. I'll give him credit. But USC had a special player on the other side. If USC's in that position, which I'm sure they're going to recruit quarterback at a high level, that's who Notre Dame's recruiting against, along with, Alabama, Georgia. You need to win up front. Notre Dame is not going to consistently outskill Alabama, USC, Georgia. Right. When you've got Michael Floyd or something, you can make that argument. That's fine. But by and large, that's not going to be the case. And even if you do, it's advantageous to just beat the crap out of the guy in front of you and make it 2nd down and 5. That never changes. So I'm cool with this.
Brian, you said earlier in the show, real quick, because I want you to build on that. You said earlier in the show about, because some people take that, well, you're kind of giving up on trying to do this, that, or the other thing. You said earlier in the show, you grew up in the Lou Holtz era. You and I both grew up in the Lou Holtz era. That was the same thing that was true back then too. So, look, they had their Rockets and their Ricky Waters, but other teams would have like 7 dudes that could run. Notre Dame would have like 3. They had the secondary guys, but the overall team speed wasn't the same. Where Notre Dame was able to neutralize that, and where their speed could then shine, is because they would beat you up in the trenches. That's why they were able to beat Miami. That's why they were able to beat Florida State. That's why they beat Florida. And even harder against Miami, because Miami was the one Southern team that actually had really good trench play, which is partly why they dominated everybody else in the South.
Yep.
And that's always been the recipe at Notre Dame. You're going to get your fair share of skill players, but to your point, you're not going to have a roster that has Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs, and Jalen Waddle on the same team. You may get one of those guys, but you're not going to get, or even 2, but you're not going to get 4 of them. And that's why it's important to get kids like this. And here's another thing too, Brian. You now have 2 offensive linemen from Illinois, 2 from North Carolina, and 1 from Kansas. I do like the aspect of maybe it's a bias that I have, but I like getting more of the northern, Midwestern type of linemen. I think those kids just tend to understand what Notre Dame is about a little bit more, I think, maybe than kids who come from different parts. Now, that doesn't mean kids from another part of the country can't shine. We've seen it, but I just really like finding as many kids as possible that are Midwestern, northern kids.
I think that you're mostly right with that. I've lived down south for quite a few years now. Most of the kids look at things differently in Dixie. I just recently moved to Texas. It's a little different than Florida, but overall the point is still the same. It's more individualistic. We need kids at Notre Dame, especially O-line. They're going to buy into Harry Heastan, the overall message from really just anybody on the coaching staff, but Marcus Freeman, and they're just going to go through the grind. My question for you with this kid, assuming and I'm sure somebody will transfer or get hurt, what are the O-line numbers in totality next year? Are we at 15? It's
so right they'll have when they show up next year, they'll be at 14 for next year with the 21, 22, and 23 classes. and then you'll have the 220 kids. So you'll have Tosh Baker and Michael Carmody, and then you'll have the 2 kids from the 2019 class, most likely.
So
assuming
they're
none of
over.
them leave. So they'll be at 18, which I think is 15 to 18 is really where you want to be with that group. And then the other thing too that is factors into this, and we'll talk even more about this in the what's next portion. But part of the reason they were, if they could find the right kid they wanted a 5th, is right now the 24 class is not looking like a real deep offensive line class, especially in the Midwest. And then there's some kids that they liked, but, like they passed on the Ian Moore kid from Indiana who committed to Ohio State. He just didn't really fit their profile. They obviously have Peter Jones, and we'll kind of dive into more of that. But they also kind of had to look at that and say maybe some kids emerge and allow us to get to 4 next year. But I think you're going to see 24 be the targeted number because, to your point, what you can't do is get into the years where you're bringing 6 guys in consistently. No. You'd have done that this year if it was the right guys, but only because you couldn't turn guys away, not because it was necessarily your ideal. So now you have 5, 4, 5, and then you get 3, and then you get back into a 4, 5, 4, 5 type of range. And with the portal, some kids are going to leave as they get to be juniors and get their degrees because they're getting passed by. So you'll see more of the older kids start to kind of leave after 3.5 years because they can transfer right away. They'll have years of eligibility, and you'll be in a situation where they're going to have their degree. So we'll see that as well. It'll work itself out. But I think 18 is about as high as you want to go,
Agreed.
But a lot of it's going to be, here's the interesting thing. A lot of it's going to be young. A lot of it's going to be juniors and younger, and redshirt sophomores and younger, with the exception of Blake Fisher and Joe Walt looking into next year when they'll be juniors. So that impacts it as well. And that's how, you look at the class impact of it. Again, I like the balance of what they do. I do. I like the balance of it. You've got length. Here's another thing too. You've got length. We'll talk about this. Harry Heastan likes length. Joe Otting is about 6'4", but he's long. Sullivan Absher is incredibly long. Charles Jagasaw is insanely long. And Christopher Terek is long. The only guy that's not real long is Sam Pendleton, who's around 6'3", 6'4", good length, but good interior length,
Different.
And that's Harry's deal. And every single one of those kids that they're recruiting plays offensive tackle in high school. And that's another thing that you see Harry Heastan usually is all about. He very rarely will he take a guy that plays inside in high school. He loves kids that play tackle in high school. And then they project to different things inside. And that's where I like it. That's where I like it. And that's where he likes it as well.
I'm curious to see how quickly they can get Charles Jagasaw up to speed.
Yeah.
You mentioned Fisher and you mentioned Alt. I would say conservatively, barring injury or something unforeseen, one of those 2 will leave after their junior year, if not both. I think that's probably something that Notre Dame is, conversed about recruiting as well. Whether you take a tackle transfer or one of these kids develops, you just want to give yourself options. But they're doing well enough now, especially with Jagasaw coming in. I would imagine they'd have somebody that could, just a high talent guy that can do that. Most schools can't handle losing an NFL offensive tackle early. It screws them up. Even Notre Dame, Michigan, et cetera, those schools, it's hard to lose. I mean, Alabama, Georgia, they have been just factory with OTs here lately. Outside of those 2 schools, and even Iowa, it's a 4 and 5 year player. So I think it's good that Notre Dame is in that position where they're not just scrambling. It wasn't all that long ago. I remember thinking to myself, we're lucky to run for 150 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Now if Notre Dame doesn't run for 150, it's very disappointing.
Yeah.
It's like almost shocking. Like last night really surprised me, but there were some things they just couldn't get USC off the field, and that killed the offense. But they rarely are in that, and they take it to the other team. OT is Notre Dame's strength, and it should be moving forward, and that's a huge advantage for the Irish.
Let's watch some film, Brian, and I want to kind of bring this up. I want to look at this kid and kind of take a dive into what he brings, right, Brian? And I think this is something obviously we like to do. Let's get him on the full screen. Y'all don't need to see us, right? He's better looking than we are anyway. So let's get this here on Christopher Terek. So he is a right tackle for his high school team, as you'll see here. This is senior film. First thing that you'll notice, Brian, obviously, is you kind of work through the different traits. When you watch a kid, you look for size, and this kid has lots of size. I mean, he's listed at 6'5" to 6'6". He's listed between 295 to 305. He's got really good length, but he's not a fat pudgy 305 where you've got to work 15, 20 pounds off first. He's that typical Midwestern big. You know what I mean? Like a Liam Eichenberg type, but type of big, as opposed to a guy that you may see coming from a southern or southwestern area.
I think he's a kid that he could play right tackle if you needed him to, but I like the way he moves in a short area. I like him better at guard, and he is a mauler. So he certainly fit what Wisconsin did,
Look at that
say
finish.
the least.
Yeah. Another thing too, Brian, that I like, he's a big kid, but a long kid, but he plays with good pad level. I mean, he doesn't move his feet great on this particular snap, but you see him sink his butt. He keeps his base wide, plays with good pad level. You see a lot of 6'6" kids that they come off really high, especially against smaller kids, and they have a really hard time kind of bending. You see a good knee bend here. Again, he's not an exceptional athlete, which we'll get into, but you see an immediate knee bend, right? Sinks his butt, bends his knees, and then shoots his hands. That's what you want to see. Now, next step for him, Brian, would be, okay, move your feet on contact, right? Don't get heavy-footed on contact. But a lot of the other stuff that you see on a clip like this and other clips, Brian, is really sound stuff that shows me a kid that knows how to bend. And, of course, you see the finish there.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be any problem with him playing on the inside. It fits his personality.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important, too. You can get away with a tackle that maybe plays a little high. You cannot have a guard that plays high, Brian. He'll get killed. He'll get crushed. You'll get in his pads the whole game. You'll get underneath his pads the whole game long. So I like the fact that he can play with good pad level. And this is why he's a guard, Brian. Like, you'll see clips of him here in a little bit where he's not like a guy that's like necessarily great in space on the edge, but his short area quickness and power is impressive. He gets on this kid in a hurry. He really fires off the ball well. You see him keeping low. What I like about this clip, he's not playing a real big kid, but you don't see his head. Once he hits that guy, you don't see his head anymore because he's got his pads low, and he's getting up underneath this kid, which is, again, not something that's easy to do for a 6'6" high school kid. And then another pancake. Lots of that in this film.
Yeah, most of the kids he's going against, once he gets his two hands on, they're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Moves his feet well when the technique is right. He can move his feet well. At times, I think he gets a little heavy-footed with his technique, but like that's a good clip where he moves his feet on contact. Other thing too, he uses his hands pretty well, Brian. I'd like to see him shoot a little bit better, but I think he moves his hands well. This is another clip. You see how quickly he gets off the ball, gets up into this kid, does a nice job of moving his feet here, overtakes that kid, and look, here's the deal, Brian. Kids don't pancake this much in college, right? Like Quentin Nelson didn't pancake people this much in college.
Right.
But I need to see a high school kid that just constantly puts people on the ground, like on their back like this. Like that's a big tell for me for a high school kid as far as just his power,
Especially for a kid that's going to have to play on the inside, at least if he's going to maximize his ability. That's absolutely true. So in his pad level, like you were talking about, Notre Dame goes up against a lot of teams with really athletic interior defensive linemen, USC being obviously one of them.
Yep.
You better have guys that can move people or they're going to get too many tackles for loss. You're not going to have a chance.
Look how quickly he gets off the line here. He really comes off the line well, moves quickly to the second level. This is one of the few second level clips. And then, of course, another puts a little kid in a little bit of the rock bottom there. Might want to work on not getting that hand around real quick. I like this here. Keeps that outside arm free. This is another fundamentally sound play. He's working on the combo block. He doesn't turn inside to the end. He keeps his hips square, sees that guy shoot inside, which allows him to easily get up to the linebacker. And guess what? Another guy that gets put on the ground. And if you watch game film, there's some game film that you can find on YouTube. This happens a lot. I mean, he really can drive people off the ball. He really gets pushed off the ball, which I like. I like a lot.
When was the last time we flipped a kid from Wisconsin?
Oh boy, I can't remember. I know they beat Wisconsin for Billy Schrauth last year, but he was never committed to Wisconsin. He was not committed to Wisconsin when he picked Notre Dame. I don't believe he was ever committed to Wisconsin. But yeah, it's been a while. And the other thing too is Bob Bostad's back as their offensive line coach, and he is the guy that kind of got a lot of that stuff started with Bielema and then Chris a little bit before he moved to the NFL and then came back to coach linebackers. Gets his feet a little narrow here You'll see that at times. He'll narrow his feet. At times, that's a technique thing. Starts off well, starts with a nice base, but he keeps that left foot kind of set, and then he brings that right foot a little bit too much. But that's all correctable stuff. Kid plays a lot of power, a lot of force. And he's a mover, Brian. I mean, that's what you've said multiple times now. Like, Notre Dame needs kids that can move people, and this is a kid that can move people.
Yeah, you need at least one road grader in your starting five. He obviously fits the profile.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what he stand. Like, we talked about this on our show before, Brian. You see a little. This is one of the few clips you can see him up close. This is where you see that thick bottom, right? You see that, Brian? Like, big butt, big thighs, big hips. Like, this is the kind of Midwestern kid I'm talking about. He's not fat at all. He's just a thick kid. But one of the things that I think that we've seen in recent years is they've got a lot of long athletic types, but Notre Dame hasn't recruited a ton of thumpers, and that's what this class is full of. Like, with the exception of Joe Otting, who's more of an athletic kid. And Joe, trust me, Joe can hit. But I mean, Jagastar's a thumper. Sullivan Absher's a thumper. Sam Pendleton's a thumper. This kid's a thumper. I don't think that's by accident with it being Harry Heastand's first offensive line class, Brian.
I think they know what we were talking about earlier. They're going to out-athlete teams to a certain degree, but in the elite level games, even if you look at Georgia right now, who I think is going to win another national title, you have to beat people up because everybody has athletes once you get into the top 10 in the country. It's still about blocking and tackling. That really doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
So why try to beat the system that's set the way it is?
Right.
You're just
look what Michigan's done to Ohio State the last 2 years. Michigan can't match Ohio State athlete for athlete. They just beat them up. That's a big key.
They absolutely mauled them yesterday. Ohio State's scheme wasn't very good on defense, and they were not ready for the physicality. So Michigan, you got to give them credit. That Keegan guy they have is a player that's similar to this kid. Keegan's just a lot more technically sound. Obviously, he's an NFL player, but they couldn't do anything with him. He had his way with the Ohio State guys.
This is one of the few pass blocks you'll see, Brian. This is good technique for a high school tackle. And to your point earlier, he could play right tackle in a Wisconsin system, an Iowa system, right? In a Notre Dame system, I think he's more of a guard. But you see nice base here out of the stance, nice, good length, not elite length there, but moves his feet relatively well, mirrors relatively well. Good high school tackle. But in college, I think you start putting this in short areas, and he projects to be a really good pass blocker. That's where I think Josh Lugg was at his best this year is an interior pass blocker. Josh, I think all the injuries have kind of taken a lot of Josh's ability to just really punish people away like he could in high school and earlier in his career with all the back injuries and stuff. But that's what Josh was coming out of high school. And I see this kid is very similar and projects very well as a pass blocker at the next level, also in my opinion. On top of being a good run blocking is why you're primarily getting him. But I think there's some projection there for him to be a good pass blocker as well with some technical work. I always like seeing an offensive lineman playing in the snow. You're like, okay, yeah, you're getting a northern kid. You're getting the right kind of kid.
Yeah, I don't get to see that where I'm at.
Yeah. Oh, I know. That's him playing defensive line, by the way.
That's a good sign.
Taking on splitting a double team. Running back just runs into him and falls down. He doesn't even really tackle the guy. I love it.
That is not a good football player.
No, it's
Bad
not.
decision. Bad decision.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he's a good football player. It's almost like every clip almost looks the same, Brian. Comes off, drives the dude off the ball, and puts him on his butt. It's like, okay, rinse, repeat. Rinse, repeat.
Oh, that's okay.
That's where you want it to be. That's absolutely where you want it to be. Here's another defensive clip.
Wasn't Chris Watt from that area?
Yes. I think Chris Watt went to the same high school.
I thought he did too.
Let me see here real quick. Chris, he was from Glen Ellen. He went to Glen Bard West. Yeah, so same high school.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was going to say that program is not a stranger to having good football players. It's Illinois, Indiana, Purdue, those kind of schools have always recruited there.
Yep. So that's again, Brian, we could keep playing this over and over and over again, but you're just going to keep seeing the same clips from this kid. Here's a defensive clip. Okay, here we go. Yeah, And before anyone asks, he's not a college defensive tackle.
No.
But like you said, you like to see it. This is a really nice play right here. Look how his snap anticipation too, Brent. He's always the first kid moving, like getting those feet working inside. I really like that quick power step. Brings that second foot appropriately, but doesn't bring it too far this time, so he's able to keep his base, work his hips around, seal that backside off, and then just punish the kid. It's a powerful football player.
This reminds me so much of when Joe Moore was at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm. This is okay. Look, this is something he doesn't play a lot of guard. This clip right here was interesting, I thought, Brian. Technique as a puller is going to need a lot of work, but he gets out there pretty quickly, and that's good to see.
His feet are quicker than you would give him credit for until you really watch the film.
Mm-hmm. It's a nice down block there. He's trying to get on. He's trying to block a kid who's playing in a 2-eye there.
Yeah, that's not a good play for what he's at.
Yeah, but he gets it and punishes a kid. Now that's harder to do when you're playing.
Yeah, Division I.
Right.
Division I, that's not going to work out well.
Right. This is nice leg drive here. Keeps his base, gets a push.
There's nothing like moving a man against his will.
Yes. And the thing too is, Brian, a lot of kids can get pancakes where they move a kid and the kid kind of gets upfield and then they fall on him. Right. That's not a pancake. That's just you leaned on a kid.
That just tells me you're not being athletic.
Right. All these kids are kids he's putting back and on their backs. That's not an easy thing to do. I don't really care what level of football. To do it as often as he does it, it's not an easy thing to do. It's really not an easy thing to do. And this is a decent level of competition, too, for Illinois, Brian. I mean, again, same area, I think it's the same district. You've got Cam Williams, who's a Notre Dame commit, who went off this year. You've mentioned that they're going to produce Division I kids.
It's suburban Chicago. There are football players, no question.
So, Brian, that is Christopher Terek's film. Look, that was much better than his junior film.
Oh,
and
100%.
I'll say this. You know who he reminds me a lot of? Now, different players, but I'm talking about making a big junior to senior jump. The late Taylor Dever, right?
Really?
Like he was a kid who, as a junior, you're looking at, you're like, no, he's not a Notre Dame kid. But then you watch him as a senior, like, whoa, because Notre Dame got on him a little bit late, similar situation, and flipped him, and you're like, this kid's, 3-star kid. Okay, where's this coming from? And then you pop the film on, and you're like, wow, this kid got a lot better as a senior. Not quite the jump because Taylor Dever, I don't think, was even a Division I kid in my opinion as a junior. And then he went to a Notre Dame caliber kid and started multiple years at Notre Dame. Was on Brian Kelly's first couple offensive lines at Notre Dame. But he had a similar jump, and I think that's something that you notice on film. Technical improvement, but really came down to power and size and just ability to just punish people. Really took a jump as a senior.
We need to find more kids like this early in the process. I'm glad they got him, but you need at least one power player, pure power player, mind you, in my opinion, if you're going to do, especially with, how much of the just straight ahead duo combination blocking they're doing. If you're going to do that, I mean, he fits it to a T.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I like about this class, Brian, because Jagasol's a power player, Absher's a power player, and Pendleton's a power player. And now you've got this kid. And I think it helps overcome that you didn't get as many of those guys. I mean, Tosh Baker and Michael Carmody in 2020, neither of those guys are power players. They're both kind of athletic, long guys. 2021 class, Blake Fisher is that, but, Joe Alt's not a power player. He's a long, athletic kid. Caleb Johnson's a long, athletic kid. You're very familiar with Caleb Johnson. He's not a power player per se. Rocco was. Last year's class, Ty Chan was, but you had Ashton Craig was an athlete. Emil Wagner was an athlete. Billy Schrouth is an athlete, although Billy also has power. And then Joey Tonona was sort of that in-between, of this. This class is enhancing just the pure, we're going to come off and punch you in the mouth for 60 minutes and move you. And that's what I think makes this class so good. I don't know if there's a better offensive line class in the country, in my opinion, than this one, in my personal opinion.
Out of the kids you just mentioned, if you think about a few selling points, people often ask me, Notre Dame has struggled forever and probably always will. Corner, D-line, it's the hardest spots to recruit. and you say, well, what about this kid? And one of the things I'll tell somebody if they haven't seen him, I'll say, here's something you need to know. He was offered by Alabama. He was offered by LSU. He was offered by Southern Cal. And those are, for like a D end. If a D end has an offer from Georgia, he's good.
Right.
It's not.
Well,
I can scout, but sometimes it's just not rocket science.
Right.
Wisconsin wanted Shrouth. Wisconsin wanted this kid. And then, of course, Fisher had offer from freaking every school in the country. And then, you get lucky with Alt, who, kind of a late developer. They've hit the home run with these kids. And then Jagasaw, too. They have some NFL players that are freshmen, sophomores, going to be junior in every class, in my opinion. That makes life much easier for your quarterback situation.
Brian, there's a trifecta of offers. And you and I were told this when we came up. Especially, there's a trifecta of offers that if a kid has an offer from those three schools, looking at it as if Notre Dame offers a kid that has offers from those three schools, it matters. And it was Iowa, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And this kid had offers from all three of those schools, which is important to me, right? And then, of course, and then the final stamp of approval is, Harry Heastan wanted them. Okay, enough said. But to your point, that was part of my argument for why I was so confident that everybody else was missing the boat with Benjamin Morrison last year. Because
Alabama.
Who wanted him? Bama. And Jimmy Lake may not be a very good head coach, and he may not be a very good defensive coordinator. But outside of Nick Saban, he is one of the 2 or 3 best identifiers of secondary talent in the country, which is why Washington every year was pumping out first and second round draft picks in the secondary every year under Jimmy Lake. When you beat Alabama and you beat Washington for a kid from Arizona, it tells me, okay, I've got what I want to see. Right. And that's what, when Chris Watt was a really highly ranked kid coming out, and Chris Watt was really good and everybody loved Chris Watt. But I remember one of the things I was told, this was when I first was getting into scouting, was Iowa loves Chris Watt, but their top lineman is Zach Martin.
There it is.
Remember that? And it was
100%.
like, because you and I were very high on Zach Martin, and Notre Dame was trying to go for Michael Schofield. They wanted Michael Schofield over Zach Martin. Now, Michael Schofield's a good football player, but you and I were like, no, this Zach Martin kid's a dude. And then that was part of the thing is that's who Kirk Ferentz views as the best lineman in the country. Like, okay, that tells me something, right? Notre Dame lucked out. This is Charlie's stat. They lucked out, and Schofield starts leaning to Michigan. So then they make a move for Zach Martin, everybody to get him, and it worked out. But, that's the thing is Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan. If those 3 kids want a school, you keep an eye on that. Pay attention to that. Just like corners, if Nick Saban offers a corner, that means something to me. When Nick Saban offers a Don Schuler, when Alabama offered a Don Schuler, that should have been a wake-up call to Notre Dame fans. Like, all right, cool. Wow, that says something to me because Alabama's offering trying to flip this kid. Okay, there we go. And that's what you see from the current class. Who are the schools offering the Notre Dame's current corners? It's LSU, it's Alabama, it's Georgia, that tells you that these kids are special. And that's Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan are all offers for this kid, and it tells you that he's a good player. So let's move on to Ryan. Brian will wrap up with a what's next. And then we will answer some questions here because we do have a few questions from people that I do want to kind of address with some we'll kind of stick more to the recruiting questions and things along those lines. But what's next with this class? Well, obviously with what's next, we'll look at it from an offensive line standpoint and then sort of the 2023 standpoint. They're clearly done on 2023 offensive line recruiting. I mean, they got their 5. They have, if not the best, they're in the conversation for the best, one of the 2 or 3 best offensive line classes in the country, in my view, and I don't see anybody else surpassing them, in my opinion. They're at least going to be in the conversation. So they're done here. So then what's next? I think the next thing is, Brian, now what this allows them to do, and they've been kind of already doing this a lot, is they've spent a lot of time focusing on the 2024 class. They already have Peter Jones in the class for 2024. And now they're going to continue to focus on a kid named Gearby Lambert, who's from Massachusetts. You've heard a lot about him on our show. We've talked about him. He's a teammate of Boubacar Traore. He's sort of that next guy that they're really pushing for. He's a pure tackle, which is important because I think, to your point, you need power players every class. There's 2 things that you got to check off every year if you're Notre Dame. Number 1, you got to recruit power players. Number 2, you need to land at least 2 pure tackles, guys that no question can play tackle. Now they may end up moving to guard if the depth chart allows for them to play there, but you got to get guys that are pure tackles, and Gearby Lambert's a pure tackle. By getting this kid, you also now really only need 3 linemen next year. And so this is going to allow them to kind of really zero in on the guys that they really like and the guys they really want. And Gearby Lambert's a name you're going to hear. They're still kind of searching for who may be that third guy. Again, it's not a great class, not a lot of great fits. I think they're looking for another pure tackle because Peter Jones is kind of a tackle guard, like power player type. I think they'd like to get another pure tackle if they can in next year's class. So when you look at what's next, Brian, in 2020 with offensive line recruiting, it's really now moving forward to the 2024 class. Gearby Lambert being the top player on the board for the staff from everything I've been able to tell from my sources. And that's been true really for a while. He was one of the very first 2024 offensive linemen to get offered, and they offered him months ago. And they've been on him for a while.
Who's Notre Dame competing?
Ronnie Stanley is a kid he reminds me a lot of as a player. Really long, a little unorthodox because he's kind of growing into his body, a little awkward, but you can see flashes of like some really impressive athleticism. There's a little bit of junior film that came out this past year. His high school, for whatever reason, just does not put out a lot of film. I still can't find film of Boubacar Traore. And they don't talk. They're not really helpful. Those type of things. It is what it is. But I probably found about 30 clips of him as a junior, and his awkwardness is kind of gone now. He's much more athletic. He's much more natural because Ronnie was that way. Remember, that's why Ronnie was a little bit underranked. People say, "Oh, all the recruiting services missed the boat on Ronnie Stanley," and I'm like, "Well, kind of, because you could see the upside, but that's the flaw in that recruiting system, which is why we focus on the 2 grades. So where is the kid now, and what's his upside grade? Well, they don't have that. Because with Ronnie Stanley, you always knew the ceiling was really high, but he also had a little bit of a lower floor because he's kind of raw. He's still kind of growing into his body. This kid has a very similar body to Ronnie. I'd say he's probably a little bit more athletic than Ronnie was at the same age. Not quite as big as Ronnie, but I think that's a very similar comp for me. Just body type, movement skills, and then the fact that he's going to need a lot of work. I think Gearby reminds me. I mean, he's a top 100 talent for me, no question, with borderline 5-star upside. And that's off of limited film, so I don't hand out a lot of 5-star upside grades when I don't have a ton of film of kids. It just says a lot about what you can see from that kid on film already. What schools will Notre Dame be competing with? Well, I mean, honestly, I think Notre Dame has kind of put themselves in position for him, Brian. But I mean, I'm pull up his offer list now. He's got a ton of big offers. He's from Massachusetts. If he's getting SEC offers already, Ohio that's State, all I need to know. Penn State, Michigan, so my LSU, Kentucky, Miami, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, South Carolina, Stanford, and Wisconsin are the schools that have offered him. Stanford offers a good sign for Notre Dame. That's historically always been a good sign. It means he goes to class. Yeah, and the school he goes to, Catholic Memorial in Massachusetts, it's a very high academic school. No question. So, yes. Yep. And then also, if you look at Gearby Lambert, he's starting to become a much more highly ranked player. Rivals now has him in their top 100. On 3 has him as the number 13 overall player in the country, and ESPN has him at number 65. So he's really seen his ranking skyrocket as more people have seen his junior film. So very, very talented, very, very talented young man. Now, the other part of the what's next, Brian, is what's left in the 23 class. Right now, Notre Dame has 2 more spots that they'd like to fill. Now, obviously, in the last week, you've seen them get Kenny Minchie, now Christopher Terek. Your offensive class is close to done. Notre Dame would like to land 1 more receiver, and we all know the kid that they're zeroing in on. That is Caleb Smith from Texas, kid that was committed to Texas Tech, a bit of a sleeper prospect that Notre Dame got on, Brian, a kid that's got a verified 4.49 40 time. He's a 6-foot slot that can play X. Reminds me a lot of like a Braden Lindsey, how you could use him type guy there positionally. More of a natural receiver than Braden was. Kid that's got great route running potential. Right. Staff is very high on him. I'm talking about just the positional fit is what I was referring to with Braden Lindsey, and the body type. Very similar to Braden Lindsey, body type-wise and positional fit. He's more of a natural football player where, Braden was a track kid that had to learn to play football. I like him in the slot in a pro-style offense. If they were playing in a spread offense, I would like him actually more outside because he's got some vertical ability. He can take the top off of defense. He's got really good route running skills. In Notre Dame's system, I think he really fits that. What I refer to him, Brian, is a pro-style slot, not a Clemson slot. You know what I mean? And so
Shifty guy.
Exactly. Like a shorter, shifty, catch a bunch of – he's more of a pro-style slot that he's going to run routes. He can do the after-the-catch stuff as well, but he's the guy that this staff is zeroed in on. They're hoping to get him get him to make a decision here or announce a decision here very soon. The staff is very high on Caleb Smith. They've been pushing hard for him. He's the guy that they kind of backed off Tayshawn Lyons for because they kind of looked at him as a better complement to the other 4 that they have in the class. Then also they still would like to get a 27th player. Now, who is that going to be? We'll find out. I think that there's a couple kids that are looking at right now. There's a chance they could go to 28, depending on what happens with the portal here coming out over the next month. But another kid that they've really zeroed in on is Brandon Hillman. Brian, you know I'm going to love this kid because he's from the 757. So you know I'm going to have a bias here. But honestly, Brian, when I watched this kid's film, I was like, this kid gives me like the feels I had when I watched Jeremiah Wusu-Koromoa. Because remember, Jeremiah Wusu-Koromoa in high school would line up at free safety on one snap. He'd blitz off the edge as like an outside linebacker on the next. He played wide receiver, running back, quarterback, corner. Like he did everything, and that's how this kid is. I mean, some schools were recruiting him as a quarterback. Some schools recruiting him as a running back. He could play receiver. He could play safety. He could play rover. And when people ask me, what's Notre Dame recruiting him to play? And I'm like, football. I mean, he's that kind of guy. You figure out where he's going to play later. I like him as a rover receiver. I think those are probably my 2 favorite positions. I think he could definitely play safety as well. And he's a kid that you just want. I mean, because like sometimes I watch the film, I'm like, man, I really love this kid on defense. And then you see him with the ball in his hands, you're like, man, I'd love to get this kid to football. But he's a kid from Churchland High School in Portsmouth, which is a very high academic kid. Had offers from obviously from Virginia. Had an offer from Virginia, which is an important offer for me to know a kid's academic standing. Notre Dame had him on campus again this fall in October as well, but he's another kid that they're pushing for, and just they'll kind of let the position part of it figure itself out later if they can get him. He announced today, he reaffirmed today that he will be making his decision known on December 7th. That is his mom's birthday, so that is the date that he picked. And he's blown up, Brian. He's a kid that when Notre Dame kind of got on him, it's got a very interesting backstory, which I'll eventually kind of get into. But when Notre Dame got on him, he was a kid that had offers from like Norfolk State and Virginia. And then all of a sudden you start hearing some rumors about, Notre Dame kind of getting on him. And then all of a sudden the offer list starts blowing up. And then when you look at his offer list now, it now consists of, because nobody had really heard of this kid prior to him starting to get some Notre Dame interest. But if you look at his offer list now, Brian, it's USC, Notre Dame, USC, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Miami, North Carolina, Kentucky, Virginia, Virginia Tech, Boston College. Here's a key one, Vanderbilt in West Virginia. So the Virginia Vanderbilt offers to me were important because it tells me that, okay, that's a kid that they've looked at the academics. But he went from none of those offers except like maybe Virginia Tech got on him, Virginia got on him late. But all those offers came in the last couple months, last month or two, as people saw his senior film. And he became more open to not playing quarterback because he was really dead set on wanting to be a quarterback. Yeah. And
I remember somebody telling me that.
Yeah, not a college quarterback, in my opinion. So he's a kid that Notre Dame is also on. They're also recruiting Khalil Barnes, who is another kind of all-around guy from Georgia. He's a kid that can play receiver, can play corner, can play safety. I'd more like him as a safety receiver type. I kind of like him more as a safety, really, to be honest with you. I think he moves a little bit more like a safety. And then don't be surprised over the next couple weeks if another DB name pops up at some point in time that the staff's taking a look at, depending on kind of what happens with the current roster. So there's just some names on the board. I'm not going to get into them right now, that if there are departures from the current roster, that you may see them look to fill those, because that's what Notre Dame wants to do. There will be some portal options, but Notre Dame is primarily going to be a program that says we're going to recruit high school kids and develop high school kids with the occasional transfer fix, which is what they've always done, right? Going back to Cody Rick. I mean, the 1988 team had a transfer on it, Pat Eilers, but it's just not going to be how Notre Dame makes their bread and butter. And we can argue all day about whether they should or shouldn't. That's just not where they are right now. They're going to try to get a quarterback and a receiver and maybe a defensive end, but their bread and butter is going to be recruiting high school kids and developing high school kids, whether we like it or not. I'm okay with it. But so I think when you see kids leave, more often than not, you're going to see Notre Dame replace them with high school kids. And that's kind of what you are going to see in this class as well. So it could get up to 28, Brian, but I'm feeling much better about my months ago prediction that they'll get to 27. I'll be shocked if they don't get to at least 27 now in this class.
Well, I think like you, and I'm not from Virginia, I'm a big fan of that kid because I've watched his film a couple of times. Where do you play him? And if you're a 3-3-5 defense or if you're a 4-3, there's a lot of ways you could look at it, but he gives you options, especially when you go against a team. 1 week's a power football team, and the next week it's a spread team. You can move him around on defense. That's how I would start there. But if he ended up at wide receiver, I wouldn't complain either. Just as an example, good athletes tend to work out. Figure it out later. Lou Holtz and Vinny Serrato, about a third of their class were kids they didn't know exactly where they were going to play. Rocket being one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just incredible how many of their key players have moved positions and not only done well at Notre Dame, ended up in the NFL. Bobby Taylor played corner, played free safety. If you're good, it takes care of itself. Give me the players, allow the coaching staff to make.
Well, Brian, where'd Reggie Brooks begin his career at Notre Dame? Where'd Audrey Denson begin his career? Right.
Yeah, I mean, they had so many running backs, and Reggie was a good athlete. They're like, we'll at least put you over here for a while. Obviously, running back worked out long term. Mm-hmm. But, outside of a guy like Bettis, who's just, that was just dumb, everybody else pretty much had some versatility. Aaron Taylor played guard before he moved to tackle as a senior. He didn't even play a tackle till his senior year. Notre Dame had some guys up front, but they found ways to make it work. If you have good coaches, those things don't tend to be conversation points on message boards very often. The teams that are 6-6, that might be more of a case because, like, when Holt came in, he moved guys all over the place. Yeah. They were 5-6 that first year, but they should have been about 9-2. They lost like 4 games by a touchdown or less, of turnovers or a drop pass, etc. And then they would have won. But that's what good coaching does. And this staff has enough experience, and they've got especially on defense now, they've got the corners coming up. I think we're going to see a lot of different things changing on defense moving forward. They need some more size inside. The USC game showed some of that, but that's not a huge concern. They've got some younger guys I think it'll be okay. Adding guys like Hillman just gives you more options for things you can do. Rover or whatever, again, that'll take care of it.
Yeah. Yeah, you let your roster figure it. I mean, another kid from Virginia that was similar to that, Brian, is CJ Procise, who began his career at Notre Dame in safety, eventually moves to be a starting receiver, and then moves to running back where he'd never played in his life and rushes for 1,000 yards and becomes a third-round draft pick in 1 year as a running back. I mean, you're going to find kids like that in Virginia. Yes, absolutely.
Remember that play he ran down the sidelines against LSU? I mean, LSU.
Oh, on the jet sweep? Yeah, 2014, getting the Music City
Bowl.
He
didn't even have the angle, and the guy didn't get to it.
And I'm Wasn't it Jamal Adams?
Yeah.
It was Jamal Adams that was chasing him. I could be wrong on that, but I think so. So that's going to do it for our breakdown of Christopher Terek and sort of a what's next for Notre Dame. We're going to do a little mailbag here next. So if you do have some questions, we're going to stick to recruiting questions for now. Brian, do you have a few minutes to kind of hang out and answer some questions with me? So we'll do that next. But before we get there, folks, please do us a favor. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Sign up for our message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We would greatly appreciate that. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. And, of course, sign up for the CFB Nation channel on Apple or Spotify. And, of course, subscribe to it on our YouTube channel. Let's get some mailbag questions, Brian, because obviously right now Notre Dame you've got signing day is a little over, it's December 21st. So it's, a little over 3 weeks away. The early signing period, which is really the early signing period is now the new signing period. I mean, especially for a team like
you're going to sign like one kid in February, maybe.
Right. No question about it. So that's kind of where Notre Dame is focused on right now. They are going to look to kind of have their class done, but also now December becomes portal month, and there's going to be a ton of kids jumping in the portal. Look, here's what we're not going to do at IB. We're not going to respond to every kid that jumps in there. But today we'll answer some of those because what people have to understand is 90% of these kids that are jumping in the portal are either A, just not going to be fits in their name, or B, are jumping in the portal because they already know where they're going. And another part of it is, and we'll kind of get to this question here, Ryan, because somebody brought this up. Antoine Porcher Rideau says, "Hey Brian, are any of the Texas A&M players who have they're now in the portal? They've lost now 4 kids to the portal last 48 hours. Are on Notre Dame's list for guys that go after in the transfer portal." Antoine, thing you have to understand is, I know what we see. We see the highly ranked kid. He might even had a Notre Dame offer. Most of those kids went to A&M with the promise of something that Notre Dame was not going to promise them in high school, and they're not going to promise them now as transfers. That's just what y'all have to understand. A lot of these kids that take the money coming out of high school that leave after a year are going to look for another NIL deal. They're not saying, well, I got my money that one time, I'm good now. They're going to look for another NIL deal. Notre Dame's not going to play that game, number one. Number two, as we've said before, it's really hard for Notre Dame to get undergrads into school. Now, I will say this. I do think it's easier for them to get freshmen.
Yeah.
Kids who are freshmen. But I don't know if that's necessarily the route we're going to see Notre Dame go a lot, because I think their goal is going to be more for, let's plug some holes that we have on our current roster with kids who have a year or two left. Now, if it's a kid they recruited out of high school that they know that they have an established relationship with, and that kid jumps in the portal, then you may see it. But most of the names that we're going to hear in the portal are just guys that are just not going to be options for Notre Dame. That's just the reality of it. So
if they got 3 kids that were all grad transfers, and one was a quarterback, one was a receiver, and one was a pass rusher, would any sensible person complain? You got to fill needs.
No, right.
I mean, it's really that this is a rare roster where Notre Dame is truly on the tipping point. We can bitch about the kids they lost because of NIL and recruiting or whatever, but that stuff is going on everywhere. It's wild for Nick Saban is losing kids over that, literally. So I can tell you that from women down south. That is no bull. So Notre Dame is very close. And they're just, they're a quarterback away from being 11-1 pretty much every year. And then, even 12-0, just a great game against USC or Clemson or whatever. And then you can be there. That's where the portal needs to come in, as Driscoll's talking about. If you can get a pass rusher, I think that's the biggest need for next year, a pure edge rusher, which everybody wants. That's super hard. I'm not saying that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. But if they get that, to go with Benjamin Morrison, taking away the other team's number one.
Right.
Good luck outscoring Notre Dame once they have a quarterback. Right. They're going to get a quarterback. I'm completely confident because the kid's going to know he's going to come in and play.
Well, we're seeing that too, Brian, is we're seeing kids looking at Notre Dame's roster and saying, like, they actually have a lot. Like, I think the people that are most down on Notre Dame's roster are a lot of Notre Dame fans. I mean, other teams look, Notre Dame could go win the national title next year, and fans of other teams are going to be like, wow, they shouldn't have been there, and they don't have players, and they're slow. I'm talking about, like, when you look around the country, when I talk to people that I know in the scouting industry and people that I know in the coaching business, they're like, I don't think people realize how much talent Notre Dame has. The thing that's been lacking is, I think, consistently at corner. They've had some good corner tandems, but it's just in spurts, right? It's like a couple years here and then a couple years there, and then, and it's not consistent, right? But what I think about obviously your corner recruiting has been elevated significantly under Mike Mickens. But, when you kind of look at it, Brian, man, kids are going to look at this roster and say, boy, they got great offensive line, lots of tight ends, receivers that can play. They're going to watch Deion Coles and be like, where's this kid been all year? They look at the running backs thinking, man, you give this kid a quarterback. We talked about this with Kenny Minchie. That's part of the reason Kenny Minchie gave Notre Dame another look. He's like, man, they got the number one receiver class coming in the country. They're loaded at running back, and they're bringing in 2 more dudes next year. They're bringing in a bunch of great offensive linemen. Like, give me that. I could be the missing piece. There's a lot of quarterbacks around the country looking at Notre Dame like that. And then Brian also said they're also going to look at the current depth chart and be like, yeah, I can do something with that,
Especially once number 15 is healthy. I think that'll.
Oh, yeah.
Look.
Yep.
You don't have to be a very good scout to figure that one out.
Right. But apparently it took Notre Dame a while to figure it out.
No comment.
Anyway. All right, let's get to – there's another question, too, speaking of the portal stuff. Jeff Fluke said thoughts on the start of the mass exodus from Texas A&M. We're going to see this happen a lot more than people think. Because
I
these
have
kids –
a couple of comments on that. Yes, I do.
I'll let you follow up, Brian. People have to understand when these kids get bought like this, and I'm not even necessarily inferring anything nefarious because it's basically the rules now and they're not going to do anything about it. But these kids aren't going to these schools because they see a vision of, I want to go there and win a championship and do all that. They're saying, you're going to offer me how much? Cool. So when they get there and things don't work out their way, and now you've got it's a double-edged sword. It's a double like negative. Like these two horrible things have happened at once, right? A completely unregulated NIL with this one-time transfer portal. So kids are going to get their payouts right away, and then they're going to say, okay, I'm going to get back in the portal again next year, and guess what's going to happen? People are going to start throwing me new offers again. And you're going to see this happen a lot to these schools that are just throwing money at kids to buy them as high school kids. It's going to happen a lot.
Here's the thing. I'm in the Houston area now, and a few of the people I know have direct ties to A&M. It's just a small world. And one of my buddies, his daughter is at A&M right now, and she loves football. And I said, well, what's the vibe there? I said, do all the students hate Jimbo? And she's a real nice girl, but she kind of looked at me and she goes, everybody wants to go. Like I was throwing a spider at her. Like, I mean, she just hearing his name out loud. Mm-hmm. So something is goofy there. I don't know what happened because obviously at one point he was a good coach. They won a national title at Florida State. Not debating that. Something has just gone flat out sideways. Yeah. This might be a 30 for 30. I'd be shocked if it's not actually.
Yeah.
In about 10 years.
How the best recruiting class of all time
just went into the toilet.
Fizzled after,
I'm not going to name names. I already know one kid that's leaving that is going to irk a lot of A&M fans if he's not already in. I got to check and see. But it's the kind of player that changes programs. That can't happen all at once. And like you said, several of these kids all at once. I can tell you from being somebody who is deeply involved with 7-on-7, the elite players all talk to each other, not just in the same community, not just from the same state, but if there's an elite D lineman in South Florida, which they always have one, he'll know a guy in LA. He'll know a guy in Dallas. He'll know a guy in Ohio. And if they end up at the same school, they will make it's weird. They make more group decisions about stuff now. And I don't know why that is. But if something goes sideways, it can get ugly. If A&M lost half of that class from this past year, it would not surprise me from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, same.
The only other thing I'll add to this, and this is totally up for debate, and I don't have a personal opinion. What Driscoll just said, these kids were getting money, not just A&M, but God knows how many different schools. Louisville's trying to do it with this class, etc. How many schools are going to take transfers and throw the bag of money at them for a second time when they took money and then ran?
Right.
I'm curious to see that.
Sadly, a lot will. I mean, these teams are so first of all, some of these collectives, they don't even have like any control over, and that's what's getting insane about it. But yeah, a lot of these, because here's what's going to happen. They're going to have to go somewhere to replace the kids that they're losing in the portal. 100%. And that's what's going to make this thing so incestuous. It's just going to be like, because it's about value. Some of these kids are smart. Do I have more value to these teams knowing I have 2 or 3 years left, or more value if I wait here and then be a one-time transfer, right? Where the shine isn't off of me yet because I was only here 1 year at whatever school. Whereas if you're sitting the bench for 3 years, the shine is off. I mean, that's what I think is going to happen. I mean, I see it. I've been pretty kind of right about this stuff. I've nailed this stuff so far. I kept telling people this transfer portal thing is not going to be a thing that creates parity. It's going to create even wider divisions.
Yep.
Because Alabama, the USCs, the Ohio States, the teams like that are going to start taking the best players from Kentucky and Vanderbilt and Indiana and all these other kind of schools. That's what's going to happen, right? And it's the NIL. We knew what was coming there. I mean, that was incredibly. I mean, it'd be a rocket science to see how that was going to go down with some kids. But the fact is not every kid. It's always been true, Brian. You and I have been doing this a long time. Not every kid is looking for that, and that's what. Not every big time kid is looking for that, and it's also some of it's regional, right? I mean, there's some of it's family. There's a lot of different things that are going to factor into this. Notre Dame will find their way, and as Notre Dame players start getting more and more and more, which they're getting a lot already, and what I think Notre Dame is doing with the NIL, Brian, more than anything, is start encouraging these kids to advertise the deals that they're getting more. Because
amen to that.
Michael Mayer's making a lot of money. The Adamiolas are making a lot of money. Kyle Hamilton made a lot of money. mean, Braden Lindsay made a comment. He's like, hey, I'm real happy with how NIL is going, right? I mean, so they just need to advertise. Hey, guys, you're going to get yours at Notre Dame. It's just we're not going to promise. You got to earn it. You're not just going to get it because –
Go to class.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Imagine that. You're going to
I know, right? So it's happening. It's happening. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But that's why you can't go the Texas A&M route. If you're going to buy players, I think actually USC is doing it the right way. Buy kids that you're getting as one-time rentals because then they come and they go and they're already ready to play. Like you don't got to worry about developing Jordan Addison, and if he doesn't play in a year, you're mad he's going to transfer. You get him for 1 year. You know what you're getting. He's going to play for you for 1 year and then go pro. I think that's a smarter way of doing it than what A&M did because, as you said, Brian, they're going to go from the number 1 class to the number 50 class in a year when you look at what's left. Like if you re-rank their class after a year, they're not in the top 25.
It's insane.
That's how I think it's going to play.
This might be the weirdest recruiting flux in a 24 to 36 month period because their class before that was really good too. And some of those kids are going to – it's unbelievable. I honestly don't know if it's out of the realm of Jimbo got fired this year because the pockets there – I know he's got a ridiculous the oil money at A&M is something that cannot be defined with words. So he's terrible. Yeah, but then they go out and beat LSU yesterday too. So I have no idea.
Yep. Yeah, which I loved, by the way. That totally made yesterday a much better day for me. Made it a much better
day. When I saw that score, I'm like, this is hilarious.
Yeah.
Because they almost who was it? They almost got beat by UMass the week before, if I remember
right. Well, they beat UMass by 17 and beat LSU by 15. So very, very similar.
College football is so wild. It's why it's fun, though.
Yeah. And just so people are clear, when I'm talking about Notre Dame possibly looking at another DB, it's more of a corner, and it's related to the current roster. So before anyone's like, oh, Peyton Bowen has nothing to do with Peyton Bowen. Nothing to do with Peyton Bowen.
Smart to mention that.
Because I know how people are going to take that. It has to do with the current roster. Okay, just so we're clear and people don't go start. Driscoll said, it's not what I said. TJ Stalika, I'm going to get this out because he has said this about 35 times. Brian, think we target the Cincinnati cornerback who decommitted today, J.Q. Hardaway. I don't know a lot about that situation. He did not decommit today, as he is a freshman at Cincinnati, so he entered the portal. So I don't know a lot about that one. I don't know if he's a kid that Notre Dame recruited or Notre Dame knows. I'll do some asking, but again, just we're not going to – if all we do is address every kid that enters the portal that people like, that's all our shows are going to be from now until signing day.
Awful.
Right? I mean,
please don't do that.
It's just – we can't do that. If we hear something, I promise you we'll let you know either on the message board or on this platform, especially on the message board.
JQ is one of the longest kids I've ever met.
Yeah.
He's a freak.
He's 6'2", right? Isn't he like really long? He's a pretty ripped up kid too, if I remember correctly.
Remember the picture I sent you of him standing next to me?
That's who that was?
Yep.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, It's about a year and a half ago. He's freakazoid.
Yeah. Zach Martin says, is Billy Strouth probably sticking to guard? I know he had limited center experience. Look, with a kid like Billy Strouth, Zach, that's a very good question. It's going to be about what gets him on the field the fastest. I mean, that's really what's going to come down to. If the path to playing time was faster at center and he was your next best interior guy, you'd move him to center. If the path to playing time, and that's what they did with Jarrett Patterson. I mean, Jarrett Patterson was not recruited to play center. He was a tackle, maybe a guard, but it was more about, look, we're loaded. We're going to be loaded for the next couple of years. There's one spot open, and he's our fifth best kid. Let's move him to center. So I think guard is the plan as of right now, Zach. But if they're in a situation where they need a fifth starter, it's a center, and he's clearly the next best kid, I think they'll give him a shot to play center as well. He was a guard in high school, guard tackle in high school. I think he was actually a tackle in high school, tackle and a guard in high school. Played some center in one of the All-Star games and looked good, I thought. But just that's kind of going to be – I think guard right now is where they're – because, like, right now they're going to lose both of their starting guards next year. Zeke Correll's got at least 2 years left. Or, I mean, he's got at least 1 year left, potentially 2 if he wants to take a sixth year. So guard's really where the battles are going to be. Zeke Correll was – after the first few games, Zeke had a rough time. But by about the North Carolina game, he started to settle down. And then in the last month of the season, Zeke Correll's been really good. So center right now is locked down for at least the next year, maybe 2. Guard is where the battles are going to be. And I think that's where you're going to want Billy Strouth is to be a guard, because that's where, they love him. The staff is very high on him. he obviously missed the spring because of injuries, but this is going to be a big spring for him because he's a very talented kid. And he's that combination of athleticism, length, and power that this staff really likes. Really likes. He was my top lineman last year's class, Brian.
I'm kind of curious to see if he can compete for a starting job next year. I don't think it's out of the question. I know it's hard to be a starter as an interior guy as a sophomore.
Yeah.
But you don't think so? That's
he's definitely going to be an option. Definitely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No question he'll be in there. No question. He'll definitely be in the battle. Will he win it? I mean, Andrew Kostoffic's going to be in there. Rocco Spindler's going to be in there. I mean, there's Michael Carmody may be in there. There's going to be kids battling for that job, but they're definitely going to give him his shot as well. And look, we've seen Harry play young kids before. And not just Quentin Nelson. Like, I'm not going to go the anomaly, like Quentin Nelson, Zach Martin. But, like, we've seen Robert Hainsey played as a freshman. Tommy Kramer started as a redshirt freshman. I mean, we've seen Jarrett Patterson started as a redshirt freshman. We've seen plenty of kids do it. It's not like it's a rare thing. But and a lot of times when kids haven't, it's because, like, Liam Eichenberg didn't start earlier in his career because he was blocked, by this kid named Mike McGlinchey, who's a pretty good player, you know what I mean?
So what it is.
Exactly. Got some portal questions down here and some other things. Michael with a question says, Brian, with Fickle leaving Cincinnati for whiskey, and I'm going to ask you about your thoughts on that here at the end of the show, Brian. Would Amari Snowden be someone Notre Dame would look into? Thanks. So, Michael, good name. I like Amari Snowden, but they evaluated him the first go round and he wasn't they just decided they liked the other guys better. I could see them maybe making a run at him, but that's not one of the names that I've heard so far. I've heard a couple names, and Amari's isn't one. I think they're more looking for kind of maybe a guy that could be a slot guy, because right now they have a lot of outside corners. They have obviously Christian Gray and Micah Bell in this year's class who are outside guys. Benjamin Morse and Jaden Mickey are ideally outside guys, although I think Mickey could eventually be a nickel with some technical work and things like that. I think they'd kind of look for a guy that's maybe a little bit more of a slot type of guy as in the cornerback position. So I think that's more of where you're gonna see. And then we had another question about where's it at here about the Ozzie Mack. Do you think Notre Dame will make a run at the quarterback from Georgia Tech who just entered the portal? No. He's talking about Jeff Sims. I really hope not. I know Ryan really likes him. I think that's more so from Ryan's an NFL draft guy, right? He likes the tools.
He's looking at tools.
Yes, and Jeff Sims has a big arm and he's athletic, but he's just not a real good quarterback in my opinion.
And he throws it to teams with the wrong color jersey.
Yes, that was going to be my other thing. He throws a lot of interceptions. And you can kind of chalk it up his first year to him being young, but he had 13 interceptions as in his first year as a starter. He had 7. So that was in 2013 or 2020. He had 13 picks in 10 games. 2021, he had 7 picks in 8 games. And this year he had 3 picks in 7 games. So he has had 23 interceptions and he's only played 25 games. Like, he's not going to come to Notre Dame and all of a sudden be a 30-10 guy, right? I mean, there's way better options out there, including some on the current roster. Like, he's a more experienced, turnover-prone version of Tyler Buckner. I mean, if you don't like Tyler Buckner, I don't know why you'd want to recruit Jeff Sims, right? And I think Tyler Buckner's a more natural passer than Jeff Sims from what we saw in high school. So there's a lot of quarterbacks that I think are going to hit the portal that I would look at a lot. I think there's going to be some really interesting names in the portal this year. Jeff Sims is definitely not one that I would look at. And Brian, I'm glad that you had the immediate reaction. Like, no. Yes. A very strong no for us. Here's a question down here from Gideon Rosa. I'm just curious about Viper, portal, and recruiting. So they will definitely have Viper as a position that they will key on. It wasn't a great Viper year in the national recruiting, Brian. Obviously, they missed on Keon. They made runs of like Caleb Herring and Shandavian Bradley. But outside of those guys, there's not a lot of Vipers out there. There's a lot of big ends in this class, but not a lot of Vipers. And so I think that kind of factored into it. And then they missed on the guys that they did like. So I think right now they're focused on the portal. But I think that there's also some guys in the roster that they really like and that I really like. I mean, Josh Burnham's a kid with very high upside. Jordan Patel has another year. Aiden Gobira can play that position. I wouldn't be shocked if for me, I wouldn't mind giving Maris Luafau a shot at Viper next year. I think he could probably do some things better there than, inside. But look, Josh Burnham, I think's got a really high ceiling, like a really high ceiling.
That's the kid I'm excited about.
I'm very curious to see if he can make a jump in spring ball, because Brian, we've seen him at games, but when Ryan Roberts and I were at the Syracuse game, and it's a basketball arena, right? So press box is really low, and we're on the Notre Dame side, and we're watching him go through warmups. And we've talked a lot about on this show, Brian. Sean Davis and I have talked about it in shows, and you and I have talked about it in the past. Notre Dame needs to get more of those guys, and when you look at them, like, that dude just moves different than everybody else. They're getting more and more of those guys, right? The 2015 team had a lot of those cats, right? Will Fuller, Jalen Smith, CJ Prosise, guys like that. This team they're starting to get there now. Like Jeremiah Wusu-Koromo was that way for Notre Dame in recent years, but they haven't had a lot of those kind of kids. The current freshman class has a lot of those kids, and the 2023 class has a lot of those kids. Jalen Snead's that kind of kid. I think Nolan Ziegler's that kind of kid, right? Benjamin Morrison's clearly that kind of kid. Another guy that's that kind of, Tobias Merriweather, Jadarian Price before the injuries, that kind of kid. The other kid that's that way, that's not getting talked about a lot now, because I think people are, look, you come as a freshman, you don't play, people forget about you. They assume you're not any good, and they move on from you. And I got to remind them, Quentin Nelson played this many snaps as a college freshman.
Yep, he redshirted.
Okay? Exactly. Will Fuller caught 6 passes as a freshman. Equanimity St. Brown caught 1. Miles Boykin caught 0, right? Like, a lot of kids don't necessarily make plays, especially when you've got Isaiah Foskey and Justin Adamiola in front of you. It's going to happen. But there's a lot of people I know around the program that this is how twitchy the kid is. Even though they had moved him to defensive end and they were building him up to physically be defensive end, they have used him at linebacker in practices at times this year. That's how well he moves. Yeah. Just for need that week, because for different things. But he's a kid that there's a lot of people in the program that are really curious to see what he does this offseason, because there's a lot of twitchiness there. Now they got to still do their due diligence, look at the portal, because he hasn't played yet. He's got to emerge from there. But there's a lot of people doing this at Notre Dame, thinking about him stepping up this year and maybe becoming that guy. And I would encourage you to go watch the last play of the game against Boston College and watch him, Aiden Gobira, and Jalen Snead on that play.
They all watch the ball.
Yes, and Josh was from the backside, but Aiden just kind of comes off. You're like, okay, that's impressive. And then Jalen goes, whew, and then Josh Burnham from the backside. It's just, you're like, that kid's built like a Viper, but he runs like a Mike, and that's what you're looking for. So I think that's also why Notre Dame didn't feel the need to panic and take a kid at Viper in this recruiting class. And also another kid that could maybe – Preston Zinter and Drake Bowen are two other kids that could maybe play there if the need arose, especially Preston Zinter, who's a pretty good tight end. So they'll have options there. And that's why they didn't panic and say, gosh, we just got to find a Viper some way, somehow, after they lost Keon, because you've got some talented options there, in my opinion.
Here's something else that's interesting. When I talked to Keon last and I asked him about depth charts and the kids that he'd seen at practices, he mentioned Burnham to me as the next guy at Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. I had no information on it. Keon brought that up to me. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was interesting. Keon knows he's good.
Yeah.
And he sweats no fool. He knows that he could bypass most guys.
Right.
And he mentioned Burnham for whatever that's worth.
Yeah. Well, that's worth something. It's worth something. There's no doubt. Got a super chat down here from Nick Baker. Thank you, Nick, very much. Hi, guys. Not sure I'm stating this question right. What makes recruiting sites target certain kids, i.e. Peyton Bowen over Jaden Osbury, for example? I assume you're meaning like Peyton being ranked high and then other guys being ranked low. Honestly, Nick, I've given up trying to figure out what goes to these people's heads. I think a big reason why Peyton Bowen is getting a push right now is twofold. Number one is they're properly ranking him now. Number one, I think he's kind of becoming more properly ranked. Yeah. And then number two, there's a push of he's a kid that's they're viewing him and pushing that he's looking around. So it's a story. It's clicks.
100%.
But he's a 5-star kid. Jaden Osbury, there's no story there anymore. He committed to Notre Dame. He's not going anywhere. What's the reason to bump him up, right? So just going to see him continue to drop and drop and drop and drop because there's no story there. And you'll see most of the kids that jump in the rankings at the end of the year are either uncommitted kids or kids that are committed to Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia. you see those kids get big bumps. I've pointed this out last year. Alabama signed about 7 or 8 kids last year that, like, the next rankings after they committed to Bama, all of a sudden they had the skyrocketing ranking. Like, I'm sure that's a total coincidence, right? Sure.
Alabama has an enormous fan base. Coincidence?
Yeah. No, of course not. Of course not. So I think it's just storyline, but I think with Peyton Bowen, for example, it's just him getting properly ranked combined with the storyline. There's no storyline with Jaden Osbury, in my opinion. There isn't. And like Drake Bowen, there's no storyline there. Like Drake Bowen, as a senior in Indiana, plays mostly against upper-level schools. Doesn't even play – he got like one game all year, I think, against a school of his level. He's a tremendous baseball player. And then – he has, Brian, I'm trying to remember the stats that I sent to somebody the other day. His stats are just nutty. Let me find it real quick. This was his senior year stats. Now, let me find it here. He had 144 tackles, 5 sacks, 2 interceptions, 4 forced fumbles. He also rushed for 1,784 yards and 26 touchdowns. I don't care what level of football you're playing. When you're 6'2" and you're 230 and you can run like that and put up that kind of number, you're a top 50 player. But he's not. He keeps getting dropped in the rankings. Why? He's a white kid from Indiana, and he's committed to Notre Dame. There's no reason to bump him up. That's why. And, you know, some people may not like me saying that, but that's the reality of the situation. That's the only reason. There's no story there. If Drake Bowen decommitted from Notre Dame, which he's not going to do, not going to happen, hypothetical, you'd see all of a sudden his rankings would go up because there's a story there.
Yeah, even if he just took a visit to Kentucky or something. Whatever
or Clemson or Auburn or one of the schools that were recruiting him. Yes.
Yeah, whatever it was. Yeah, I mean, he absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's no click. There's no clicks. He visits Notre Dame like every other week.
Yep. Let's get to some more questions. You got a super chat from TJ Fallon. Thank you, TJ. Brian, that play made me so happy. Snead and Josh look so fast. Future is bright. Yeah, I mean, and Nolan Ziegler, too. I mean, he wasn't near the ball, but you could just see, like, that kid's like 6'3.5", and he just moves different. And that's what I love about the 22 class. And as athletic as the 22 class is, the 23 class is even more athletic, just from a number standpoint. I mean, Jaden Osbury, Brian, is a kid that I just don't think – I think because of the drop in the rankings and that he's not a real social media involved kid, he decommitted and you don't hear a thing about him for the next several months. I don't think people appreciate just how good that kid is and how dominant he is at a pretty good level of high school football. I mean, did you see what he did to Arch's team and Arch this past weekend?
They destroyed him.
Oh, yeah. That kid is really good.
I met him at the Under Armour event at IMG. He doesn't say boo. He just nods very much as a grown kid.
Yep.
Yeah, he doesn't want media attention, which is not helping his ranking at all.
Yep.
If he would have been still fooling around and visiting in Arkansas and LSU and Texas A&M and stuff like that, Auburn, his ranking would be higher. Period.
Yep, absolutely. And look at the schools they beat him for: A&M, Michigan, LSU. You know, there'd be a lot more buzz. And it's sad that it's that way, but it's just that way. That's the reality of it. Got a few more recruiting questions here and then a couple others. ND Estimate Trucking LLC. Brian, Rico Flores and the Texas Tech kids seem pretty similar in your opinion. What's the biggest difference and who can see significant playing time first? I don't think they're the same, though. I think Rico is more of a pure outside guy. Rico is one of the best high school route runners I've seen in the last few years. I mean, Rico is a really precision route runner. I think Rico is a little stronger as a player. I think Rico's more of a pure outside guy that can play slot. This kid's more of a slot that can play outside. I think this kid, where I like this kid more, is this kid's a better after the catch guy. You see it as a punt returner, as a kick returner, catching quick throws, whereas Rico's more of a traditional receiver to me. So, and who can earn the fastest playing time? I mean, they'll both get a shot. I think Rico's foot injury might slow him down a little bit. But I think, look, all 5 freshman receivers, if healthy, if they get Caleb Smith, all 5 freshman receivers would have a shot to earn a playing time next year. So I'm going to be 4 scholarship receivers next year. I mean,
it's just math.
Yeah, exactly.
It's sad, but it's just math.
Yeah, thanks, Del. No question about it. Shanty Irishman says, who is someone in the portal that could replace Michael Mayer and Foskey, assuming they both declare? I get where people are coming from with the tight end thing. Mayer's going to be gone. You may lose a kid from the current roster. I don't think that there's necessarily a need right now to do that. If anything, I would say go find a kid that in the 23 class you can land late or flip late. Look, they don't necessarily – they'll have potentially have Kevin Bauman, potentially have Kane Barong, Mitchell Evans. You've got Holden Stace, Eli Raridan. And Eli Raridan got hurt early enough to where he'll be back next year at some point. And then you've got Cooper Flanagan coming in, who's a big kid who could help out as a freshman as a blocker.
Not worried about tight end.
Yeah, I don't feel the need for that. There's other positions that have a greater need. Now, if you're in a situation where, let's say Brock Bowers calls and says, hey, I want to come to Notre Dame. Okay, we can have that conversation, right? But other than that, I think they're fine. They're fine.
Agreed.
Okay. Matt
Sometimes
McCarthy
it's not that complex.
Yeah, it's not. Brian, would Austin Osbury be someone that would interest you if he were to hit the portal? I really wanted him out of high school. That obviously is Jaden Osbury's older brother. I like Austin Osbury. I like him more as a safety for me. I think he's more of a safety type of kid. If he hit the portal, would I be interested in Austin Osbury? Absolutely, I would. And not just because he's Jaden's brother. I like him. I think he's a good cover safety. I do. I like big corners, Brian. And it's not that he can't play corners. I think he fits safety better. I like big corners that can cover and moving them to safety. That to me is the future of where I want to see defensive football, right? Or get a safety like Peyton Bowen, who is a safety but could go play corner if you needed him to.
He can play running back, receiver,
Peyton Bowen can play wherever he wants. But if I were to say, hey, they're going to move Peyton Bowen to corner, you wouldn't be like, oh man, that's dumb. I don't think. I'd be like, oh, okay, cool, right? I want guys that can cover, and as many guys as can cover as possible. And that's what limited this defense a little bit. Is outside of Xavier Watts, especially when Brandon Joseph playing the way he was, who do you really see at safety that's a cover guy on the current roster? That's it. Xavier Watts, that's really it.
Xavier showed me some things last night, and that's a good sign. But to your point about Osbury, look, Notre Dame is not dynamic at the safety position by any stretch. It's still open moving forward. They should at least consider their option. That's all I'm saying. That is a position, Brian, where I think you're going to see Peyton Bowen come in and get a chance to play day one. He's an early enrollee too, which is huge. 100%. I'll be shocked if he's not in the starting lineup by middle of the season at the latest. Agreed. But it's also a position where I think, depending on what you do at corner, and with the two kids you have, there's some guys at corner that I think could project to be pretty good safeties as well if the need arose. But that is one of the few positions on this roster that you look at and say, right now, with who's on the roster now, it's just not good enough to be on that level. Now, they're good enough at other places to overcome it, but ideally you don't want to get into situations where you have to win games because of that group. It's not on that level that it needs to be. There are some of those positions, but they're not alone. There's some other teams that are really good that have shaky secondary. I mean, I'll take maybe Ohio State's safeties over Notre Dame's, maybe. Not their corners. Definitely not taking their corners. Definitely not. Definitely not. Let's get to some more questions here. That's a good one, Matt. Appreciate that. Here's one from Jason Sexton. Not sure what the IB crew thinks of him or how realistic it is, but I like Tanner McKee from Stanford. Could use another year to increase his draft stock. A month ago, I'd have said, why are we wasting time talking about Tanner McKee? Why, if you're a quarterback that wants to go play in the NFL, would you leave Stanford and not play for David Shaw, who's one of the better quarterback developers in the country, in my opinion? And, I mean, he turned Davis Mills into a third-round pick despite the kid hardly ever playing. Now, Davis Mills has talent. What I'm saying is he developed into that point. Quarterback development has not been David Shaw's problem. But now David Shaw's gone. And so that might change things a little bit. If Tanner McKee entered the portal, Brian Smith, would you make a phone call? I would gauge interest. I mean, with what Notre Dame had last year from the portal, is McKee as good or better than what they had last year? Meaning Jack Cohn, or what the options were for this year? Cohn. Like the key down slow. Okay. He's not as experienced, but right. I think he's got better NFL talent. He's got an NFL. His arm is pretty good. Yeah. So
and he'd be playing behind a pretty darn good offensive
that's
line.
what I mean. Like if
Yeah.
you can run play action on 2nd and 4 at your leisure with his arm, life is pretty good.
Yeah.
That's how I would look at it. Number 7, assuming he's healthy next year, is going to run for 1,500 yards. You don't
You're
have
going
to
to still
have,
run the ball a ton. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they're not going to really change their offense, but David, even though they switched it up a lot because they just didn't have the guys to run power football like they did before. He did what he had to. But now that he's gone, I mean, I've heard different rumors about who Stanford's going to go after, but that's a terrible job.
Right.
It's a terrible job.
You're just not going to get support.
The administration does not want to let in the kids they need to play the same spots we bitch about with Notre Dame. Corner and stuff is really hard. You think it's bad for Notre Dame? You have no idea.
Yeah.
So,
and it's not. It's much easier for Notre Dame to get high school kids in than Stanford. It's just harder for Notre Dame kids to keep those kids eligible than it is at Stanford. That's pretty much a well-known fact in the college football world. Yeah, it's not a great job. I don't – his lack of mobility is the only concerning thing for me.
Yeah, he's a pocket kid.
Yeah.
But you're not running RPO all day. You're not.
No. Well, you can run RPO. You can't run read.
Well, my definition is the quarterback can move.
Right. Right. Yeah. You're going to run the Sarkisian versions of RPOs, which is
okay. I mean,
pull and throw. Right. I mean, but you're not doing stuff that like USC was doing with Caleb Williams last night. Where you're pulling and getting on the perimeter, pulling and keeping and things like that, or what you would do with Tyler Buckner, or things like you're not doing that stuff. He is a pocket passer. I like Tanner McKee's tools. This will be a conversation we'll have. There's just some other guys that I might like a little better.
Oh, no, I'm not saying he's
I'm not saying – I'm just giving my –
Yeah. I agree. He wouldn't be – from who I expect to go in the portal, and there's a few kids that some people that are here probably if they came in and I said they should look at, they'd be like, why? It's because their school they're attached to. Quarterbacks develop differently. Like we knew Benjamin Morrison was going to be an NFL player.
Right.
The film is –
We've been –
yeah, I mean, I talked to somebody at Notre Dame, and they're like, he's 3 now.
Right.
It's just like –
yeah.
So quarterback is just unbelievably mental. So many of the kids that come out and I watch them throw at a 7-on-7 or something, like, okay, but these are basic 1 and 2 read concepts.
Yeah.
And they don't have somebody trying to hit them. Quarterback is ungodly difficult. Yeah. So if a guy goes to a small school and makes it, hint, there's a certain guy in Buffalo that's done that. It's pretty good. It just happens. You can't look at the school they're coming from once they enter the portal. Yeah. Can't do it because it is random with quarterback.
Yeah. Like the thing I do like about McKee with the big arm, he would fit Notre Dame's run, play action, get the ball downfield, take shots with the big receivers look. But I think Tyler Van Dyke fits that as well. I think Devin Leary would fit that. That's another name that people brought up. Michael Rudiger said, would you jump on Leary if he jumps in the portal? But to fit, I'll answer this next, Michael. But just to finish up on McKee, if that was the guy that Notre Dame got, I'd be fine. I'd be good with that. I'd be real good with that. It's just he's another guy that you look at and he's thrown 15 picks the last 2 years. It's just when you watch his film, you're kind of like you understand why. He played behind a terrible offensive line and he can't get away from it like Jeff. It's not always about bad decisions. It's like he threw a pick against USC early in the game where it's like the ball gets tipped, like goes through his receiver's hands and it's like it's picked off. It's like stuff like that. He would have such better talent around him than he's got at Stanford right now, especially up front. Well, I shouldn't say better talent, better coaching and better talent, but not quite. I mean, they've got some talent on the offensive line at Stanford. Just coached horribly. So, that would be a name that I would look at. But another name is Devin Leary. So I've kind of gone back and forth on Devin Leary, Brian, because number one, I love Devin Leary as a player. Everybody knows that. We ranked him as one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the country coming into the season. Had a great year last year. It's just the injury history is what concerns me.
Yeah, he's got an upper and a lower that are serious.
Yes. And the upper one, the most recently was an upper one, so you don't know how that's going to affect his throwing. But I will say this, getting Kenny Minchey makes me a lot more willing to take that chance if that's the best option out there. Because I don't want to play Kenny Minchey as a freshman. I don't. But between Drew Pine, Tyler Buckner, and Kenny Minchie, if your transfer guy, assuming everybody stays, and Angeli, if 3 of those 4 guys are still on your roster with a grad transfer, I feel like if that kid doesn't pan out, you've got some pretty good options that can play for you, with Buckner coming back. But I just don't want a roster with a bunch of injury question marks. That's my big concern with looking at a kid like Devin Leary. But if you could tell me he's going to be healthy, I'd say, yeah, I'd definitely take a look at him. There's no question. I mean, he's a really good football player. And then you put him on Notre Dame's roster with the guys that they have, you're like, boy, that kid fits that pretty well. Would he be my top guy? I don't know if I really have a top guy right now. So and another one that was asked, Brian, is the kid from Clemson, DJ. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, absolutely not.
Something's wrong there. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it was bad look. Really, really, really bad look. All right, here's some more questions as we wrap up here. Let's get down to here. Brian, TJ says, who's the tight end you mentioned from Nebraska? I don't know if I mentioned a tight end from Nebraska. We've talked about the 2024 tight end from Nebraska named Carter Nelson that Notre Dame was looking at. But that's kind of, I don't know if that's who you're referring to. We have a question here from, we already got to that one. We have Patrick Tolan with a super chat. Thank you, Patrick. Could Notre Dame bring someone like Shaw on staff, or would there be interest from either side with quarterbacks they will have on the roster in the upcoming years? Man, if you could somehow get David Shaw as part of your football program, that's a win. I don't think
I can't imagine that not being an automatic, to be honest.
If he wanted to come like mentor Tommy, I'd take that in a freaking heartbeat.
I know he's had some family problems in the past. Like his brother was sick at one point, and that. My guess is the guy's wore out and wants to sit on his butt. Yeah. Which
I think an analyst job could be something that could attract him. You don't go on the road recruiting. You're just sitting in the office. You can go, do whatever you got to do. I think he's going to do TV stuff. I think he's going to spend time with his family and then do some TV stuff.
He'd be perfect for Pac-12 game of the week.
Because he does such a great job on the draft stuff. I mean, he's excellent on the NFL draft stuff. Like, he's a natural on TV. He enjoys it. He's smart. But if because everybody talked about David Cutcliffe and all that. If Tommy was open to it and you could get David Shaw on your staff for like a year or two to let him just recover mentally and emotionally with his family, whatever, dude, you don't even need him to be on campus. Just break down film and do Zoom meetings with them. You know what I mean? Like, just get them on campus during football season so we can watch the kids work out and give some tips and stuff. Like, that'd be phenomenal. But I don't see it happening. But yeah, absolutely, I would do that.
That's an 100%. Easy one. Yes.
100%. He's one of the best offensive minds in the game. Like, look, where he has failed in recent years is like with recruiting, putting a staff together, being too loyal to assistant coaches that are clearly failures. Like, those are the things that have cost him at Stanford. Not replacing guys like, Derek Mason with equal hires. I mean, Derek Mason is such a significantly better coach than Lance Anderson. And that was a big drop-off defensively. And then you just leave Lance Anderson there for years to do a bad job. Those type of things are things that cost him. There's never been a question about whether or not David Shaw is still not one of the best offensive minds in the game. He flat out is. And he is much more in line with who Tommy is than, someone who, Rich Rodriguez, wanted to do something or something like that. Like, no thanks. I mean, offensive mind, but that's a completely different universe as an offense. David Shaw's a pro-style guy. Tommy's a pro-style guy. They like different things. I think that'd be a great mentorship if that was something that both sides are willing to do. I don't think that's going to happen. Like you said, usually guys, when guys retire like this, Brian, they want to take a break and clear their heads and take care of their families and do what they, take a step back. But I'd still make the call. I mean, I would have made the call 30 seconds after the announcement was made. Like it would have, if it took me that long. Well, hey, man, what are you doing next year?
I bet you Saban's already inquired.
Oh, no doubt.
Not even if I make this.
That would just be make me so disgusted if they replaced Bill O'Brien with David Shaw. I'd be so upset. I'd be so upset. Yeah. So, but yes, David Shaw did retire. It was time. He had done everything he could at Stanford. They weren't supporting him. You could tell he was just kind of coasting there. and I get it, because why am I go bust my tail knowing I'm not going to get most of these kids into school, and then when I do find these kids, some school's going to come in with an NIL deal or they're going to offer them early enrollment, and our school's not going to support it, and it's just like I get it, but his time as head coach was over. I just think it was one of those things where it doesn't mean he hasn't lost his mind is still there. He's still a great football mind. All right. So
now the question is, what's he going to be able to do long-term now that is he done? That's my only question.
Yeah.
He might be.
Yeah.
He might be.
He's at that age where, he's made a lot of money at Stanford. He's going to be a guy that, he's 50 years old. So he's not old. But he's at that age where, I'm just going to go be a TV personality for 10 years and make a ton of money. And, it's, the life is much better than being a football coach, and do draft stuff, do game day stuff, and make good money doing that. And then I get to chill and, live my life. Does he get that itch to – this is the question. Guys do that thinking that's what I'm going to do. Like, I genuinely think Urban Meyer is twice retired thinking he was not going to coach anymore. But then he just – I can't not coach. Other guys are – Bill – like, who was the guy for the Steelers? Bill Cowher. Like, the itch never came back. Just like not enough to take a job.
He could have had as many jobs as he wanted.
Oh yeah, some guys just don't ever get that back. So, Skeet Davidson says, "Did we ever talk about Fickell to Wisconsin? We did not." And Brian, I want to get your thoughts on Luke Fickell taking the Wisconsin job.
There's a lot of different things with this. Anytime a coach, and I start with Notre Dame because I'm a Notre Dame fan. But anytime a coach goes to a school, what's their traditional weakness, and does that coach help it? He's a defensive coach, but he's had ridiculously good corners. They've hit the home run on some shots in the dark at corner. That's just never going to happen like that again. And he wants to play cover one and all this. Wisconsin doesn't get those kids. I'm a little worried about that. Mm-hmm. Two, what's he going to do for his coordinators and stuff? Who's he going to bring in? Is Jim Leonard leaving? The staff is really my concern. They're not Stanford, but they have really high academic standards for a state school. They struggle to recruit elite skill guys outside the numbers forever. Can he improve it? Does his staff improve it? All of that goes together. It's all about recruiting and staff. He can coach, but I don't think he's a great recruiter anyway, and they hit the home run when they had a certain guy who's now in South Bend as well.
Two certain guys who are now in South Bend.
Chad also. It's
three guys that were really good recruiters.
And it's like, and I'm not picking on Fickell. He's a very good football coach, but there are certain schools, just based on proximity, that are up against it at corner, D-line, etc. Wisconsin's one of them. So do I think he's going to improve it? Well, it's going to be better than it was. I mean, that guy ran it into the ground.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm not sure they're going to get an elite hire out of this. We'll see.
So, I think he'll be a slightly better version of Bo Pelini. That's what I think he'll be. An 8 to 10 win coach every year, mostly 9 to 10.
4 to 10 and 2, but it's in the Big Ten West.
Right.
And when they play USC, they'll get beat 38.
But that's going to change soon. When USC and UCLA jump, they're going to get rid of the East and West, I believe, and do different type of – I think they're going to go to pods is what I think I read that they're going to do. I'm not sure. I could be wrong on that.
Doesn't have the ability to play on the perimeter of those.
Right.
We just don't.
No. And I don't think they're going to be able to – he's going to have an easier time getting those kids at Cincinnati than he would at Wisconsin.
Cincinnati has zero academic standards for athletes.
Some of the pushback that people have given me when I say he's not a strong recruiter is, well, he was known as a really good recruiter at Ohio State. It's much easier to sell that. Number one,
look, it's
your alma mater. You're going to have a different passion about your alma mater, right? And number two, you're recruiting in-state kids. Like, Wisconsin can't make a living on when they got to go to Illinois, they got to go to Florida, they got to go to Texas, they got to go to California, they got to go all over the country and get kids. And you're just he doesn't strike me as a guy. Now, again, Brian, to your point is, let me see the staff he puts together.
That's everything.
But I'll just say this. I was not impressed by the replacement hires he made when he lost coaches this last couple cycles. I didn't like the replacement he made for Marcus Freeman. I didn't like the replacement he made for Mike Denbrock. I didn't think he did a great job in making replacements, to me, to be honest with you.
I'm curious if Jim Leonard even considers sticking around. I don't know the guy. I don't know much about him. I doubt it.
Yeah,
he'll probably be irked.
It's another call that I would make. if it was up to me. So,
100%.
yeah.
I mean, he knows football.
Yep, absolutely. And then I think that we're getting down to the last couple. The worst 2K big man HD or big man HD asks, will Notre Dame look at a transfer receiver this offseason? That will quarterback, receiver, and edge are three positions that you will definitely see Notre Dame be actively looking in the portal for this year. Then Ricky Harris asks, Brian, this is a long shot. You may not dig this question, but if Tom Clements wanted to come and tutor Tommy as far as quarterback coaching, would you think about that? Brian, I don't know enough about Tom Clements as a coach to speak on this. Are you more from, I mean, obviously he's got the Notre Dame and he's been a QB coach and a coordinator in the NFL, but I don't know enough about his success or his knowledge or anything else other than his resume to speak on that. So I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
I know a little bit just from one of our former mutual friends, Samoji. Samoji liked the guy and all that. He's a pretty strong personality. And when he didn't get the Notre Dame job, when he tried to get it at one point, he was pretty irked. He's an opinionated guy. Those kind of people as quote unquote helpers, I'm not so sure that's going to work out real well. And I doubt Tommy is probably looking for a lot of guys don't want people looking over their shoulder. It's just part of sport. It sucks for the team. But from a human being standpoint, I understand. I'd be shocked if Tommy would accept that, whether or not Freeman wanted to do it or not.
Right.
Just my opinion.
Then last one, we'll get to this one. This is going to be the last question because we got to get running. Brian has already given us way more of his time than I asked him to give, so we appreciate that. But this is something that's fascinating. Blake Jar says, thoughts on Matt Rule in Nebraska? I live in Omaha, and there's some of their former players who hate that. There are some former players who hate the hire. I heard from a guy that used to do some contributing for Irish Breakdown who lives in Nebraska who also tweeted about this, and I followed up with him on Twitter, and it was like, there's a lot of people in Nebraska that don't like this hire. And I think those people out of their freaking minds. Like, this is as good of a hire. And I don't even mean this as like, well, this is as good as you're going to get. I mean, I cannot dream of a better scenario than for Nebraska right now, other than like Tom Osborne gets reincarnated as a 35-year-old coach. I mean, I don't know what they wanted. This guy is a really good football coach. He brings toughness and discipline, and he can recruit multiple parts of the country, which is exactly what Nebraska needs right now. He's the anti-Scott Frost. I don't know why. If I'm a Nebraska fan, I'd be doing backflips right now getting Matt Rule. Like, you caught such a break by him getting fired by the Panthers. Brian, so thoughts? Because I think people are insane for not at Nebraska for not thinking this is an absolute home run hire, in my opinion.
Well, this is probably the same fans that still think Nebraska should be ranked in the top 5 every year. I'm just going to be blunt about it. Good luck getting this, like we were talking about with Wisconsin, getting the players outside the numbers to go to Nebraska. In today's political climate, in today's world, they can't. What, they recruit maybe 5 kids in state a year, maybe.
Yeah,
it's about players. Yeah. It's about players. If I'll put it to you this way: if you made Nick Saban 10 years younger, and he took over the Nebraska job tomorrow, he probably would not win a national title. It'd be possible. It'd be easier, but you still got to get certain guys at certain spots. It's just about the dude.
Well,
the end and corner being the top 2. It's hard to get those kids to Nebraska. Rule has developed 3-star talent. When he took over Baylor, that was a dumpster fire. And they were really good, really quick. Yep. He can develop talent. He has an eye for it. He seems to like recruiting at least some. And he took Temple over. I mean, good Lord, was that a horrible team. So
I think Nebraska's fan base is also very unrealistic about who they are as a program.
Well, that's what I
actually think the right coach at Nebraska can win there to the point where they are a consistent 10-win team who maybe once every decade has that team that maybe can make a run.
Well, yeah,
because they can get JUCOs, they can get West Coast kids, they can recruit Texas. I mean, you know, if you have someone who's a really good evaluator, that's going to, because here's where they will get the athletes, Brian. Finding that 3-star kid from Florida that the SEC passes on. Finding that 3-star kid from Texas, the Caleb Smith like Notre Dame is pushing for, right? That kind of kid, right? Finding the Jeremiah Usu-Corboas. You have to have a really good evaluator, and I think he is that. I think Matt Rule he did it at Temple. That's how he won at Temple. He wasn't beating Penn State and Ohio State and Michigan and Notre Dame and teams like that for kids from Jersey and New York and Florida. He was finding those kids that were low floor, maybe high ceiling guys, those kids those sleeper type of kids that he could develop. And the other thing too is Nebraska had 2 spurts of greatness from a championship level of football. They had the back-to-back titles in 70 and 71, and then they won 3 titles in 5 years under Osborne, and 2.5 titles in 3 years, in 5 years in the 90s. That's it, right? Like that's their football. Now they had really good teams for a long time, but they could never consistently win championships. I mean, again, do I think they can get back to that? Between 71 and 94, I actually do think they can. I do believe Nebraska, where they're positioned, can find because here's what kids that are like that would go to that area, Brian, kids who are just looking for a chance, kids who got bypassed by all the Texas schools or the Florida schools. If you find someone who's a really good evaluator, you can get enough of those kids to be a pretty good football team. But the JUCO ranks, this is the big thing. The JUCO ranks don't produce kids like they used to, and that's where Nebraska would find those kids. A lot, the linebackers and the DBs and stuff, they would find a lot of those JUCO kids, and now those kids are just they're not producing those kids like that anymore, and so I think that's hurt them as well. But your point, yes, that's what Matt Rule is. He will find those 3-star kids from Texas that you're like, you beat North Texas for this kid, this is a joke, and you cry about it on signing day, and then 3 years later you're crying about why did this kid leave early for the NFL? I mean that's who Matt Rule is, in my opinion. And that's why I think it's a great hire. And again, toughness and discipline, 2 things that program is desperately lacking that I think he brings.
Think about how many close games they lost in the last 2 years where it was a false start penalty that screwed a drive or ball secured, just something dumb, self-inflicted, to your point. They should have won more than 6 games both of the last 2 years, and they didn't finish 500 either time.
Right. Yep. No doubt. No doubt. So 10-Day said Nebraska needs to go the JUCO route. Give me my props, Coach. Hey, 10-Day, I said it first, man, so I'm not giving you any props. I'm just kidding. But, I mean, that's the thing, too, is when you look at programs, Brian, we've talked about this with, like, Notre Dame, and people say, why is it harder to recruit at Notre Dame now than it was in the Lou Holtz era? Well, because you could find a Ricky Waters and a Rocket Ismail in Pennsylvania and the Jerome Bettises and the Todd Lights and those guys in Michigan, where those states aren't producing those kids anymore. You got to go much further away than Lou Holtz had to go. Now, Lou would go to Texas to get some kids and Florida to get some kids, Brian. But if you look at the elite athletes they had on that 88 team, a lot of them were Northern kids. Anthony Johnson was from South Bend. Todd Light was from Michigan. Jerome Bettis was from Michigan. Or no, he wasn't on the 88 team. Ricky Waters was from Pennsylvania. Rocket Ismail was from Pennsylvania. Now, you got the Pat Terrell from Florida's. You had guys like that. In the early 90s, you had, where's Tom Carter from? Was he from Texas or from Florida?
Him and Terrell played on the same freaking high school team. Okay,
so he was a Florida kid, right? And you've got Bobby Taylor was from Texas, I believe, right? So, I mean, you started getting some of those kids, but that was after Notre Dame had won a title. Winning a title opened up that door that you may not have had. Early on, he was winning with Northern kids. Michigan and Indiana and Illinois and Pennsylvania don't produce the athletes that they used to. And we've talked about this. It's population movement. It's
100%.
More, jobs are now in the Southeast and the Southwest more than they were in the North, as the Industrial Revolution kind of came to an end, and, not as much coal and steel and all these other kind of factories start more jobs start getting shipped overseas and start importing those goods from overseas and all that other stuff. You see jobs start moving, and that's why you see the population shift. So now, instead of Pennsylvania being, in the 20s in the Electoral College, they're at 18 now, and they're going to lose another couple here in the next go round because you don't have as many people. And so as that shifts, you've got to recognize there's more kids coming out of North Carolina now. There's more kids coming out of Georgia now. And so that's kind of the difference. And Nebraska, the thing for Nebraska is it's the JUCO thing. The JUCO ranks still produce kids, just not as many as it used to. JUCO used to be a much more prominent option, especially when there was Prop 48. Prop 48 killed JUCOs, because you started getting more. That allowed more kids to start going to college and sitting out a year, And as they've kind of lowered the academic standards to be eligible in the NCAA, fewer kids have the need to go to JUCO. Now you're having kids go to JUCO that are either get in trouble or aren't recruited by anybody. You're not seeing as many kids go the route of having to go in the JUCO route because they couldn't get into school somewhere. Those kids are much more rare now than they used to be. So I don't think that's a good thing. I think a lot of these kids could have benefited from going to a JUCO and playing for 2 years as opposed to sitting on the bench somewhere else for 2 years not getting coached. But, NCAA doesn't care about actually helping kids if you haven't figured that out by now. So anyway.
Yep.
That's it, Brian. Great show today, man. Really appreciate you joining me. Always a pleasure having you. Congrats on being down the Lone Star State now, making that move from Florida over to Texas and what went with that. So we appreciate that. We'll love to get you back on again, of course, here very soon as we get closer to signing day. We're going to have a lot of recruiting topics to talk about here over the next month. So for Brian Smith, I'm Brian Driscoll. Thank you all so much. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Check out our main website at irishbreakdown.com, and have a great rest of your week. And we will talk to you again very, very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.